So this next lesson is about converting angle measures. There are two types of angle measures. The two types of angle measures are degrees, which you're used to, and the symbol is that little circle up at the top after the numbers. And then this year we're learning about radians. Radians is a degree measure or an angle measure that is something different that you haven't really talked about. And it talks about in terms of pi. It's parts of the circle. So it's either going to be labeled in radians if it's just a number and it will state that it's a radian measure, or it's going to have a pi in it. So those are the two types of angle measures that we're going to talk about. Something that you need to know is that pi, a radian measure, is equal to 180 degrees, a degree measure. This is important to know. Pi is the same thing as 180 degrees. I know you're used to pi being the same as 3.14, but it's not. In this case, because we're talking about the measure of an angle. We're not talking about the area of a circle or finding radius or anything like that. So pi is equal to 180 degrees when we're talking about angle measures. When you're converting angle measures, you can use a simple thing like a proportion, which I'm going to write down for you. So when I'm converting degrees to radians, I'm going to use a proportion. And you could also use this when you're converting radians to degrees. You don't always have to use this when you're converting radians to degrees. It just depends on what kind of radian measure you're given. So the proportion that you want to know, proportions, remember, are two fractions set equal to each other. I know for my radians, pi is equal to, in degrees, 180 degrees. So those are always going to be my denominators and my fractions. In the top, you are going to write, depending on what you're given, you're either going to write what you're given or an X, if you don't know. Or if you're given degrees, you're going to write the given degrees or an X. So here you're going to be given radians. Remember, it could have a pi in it or it could just be a number. Or you're going to write the given degrees above the 180, because that's a degree measure. Or an X if you don't know. So you should only have one X, depending on if you are given the radians or you're given degrees. So when you're solving the proportions, you guys should know, you always cross multiply and then you go through the steps to solve for, in this case, is going to be X. So that's it for the notes part. Now we're going to do a couple examples. Alright, so we're going to do a couple examples converting an angle measure to radians, so I'm going to be given degrees and then I'm going to change to radians. So the first one would be 210 degrees. So I'm going to set up my proportion. You'll always have a pi and a 180. Since I'm given 210 degrees, I know that's going to go over my 180 degrees because that's a degree measure. And I don't know my radian measure, so that's where my x is going to be. So I'm going to cross multiply. So I get 210 pi equals 180 x. Radians you want to leave in terms of pi, so you don't want to use 3.14 in terms of that pi. You want to just leave that pi there. So I want to divide by 180 because I'm solving for x, so I want to get x by itself. So if I'm going to leave that pi there, I need to simplify the 210 and the 180. The easiest way to do that is in your calculator is type in 210 divided by 180 and then use the math frac button, which is something that you should know. Math is the third button down on the left. And the frac just means converting the decimal to a fraction. So your calculator will do that for you. So the pi is going to stay. That's why I have it written here. And I'm just simplifying 210 divided by 180. So after I type that in my calculator, I get 7/6. So my answer is going to be 7 pi divided by 6. And you can check your answer too if you want to make sure you're right, which I suggest you do. 7 times pi, and we know pi is equal to 180, so I can type that in my calculator. 7 times pi is 180. And then divide that by 6, and you should get 210. Okay, so we'll do another one. We'll do a negative angle this time. So negative 300 degrees. So again, I'm going to set up my proportion. You're always going to have a pi and a 180. I know negative 300 degrees is a degree measure, so I'm going to put it over my 180. So negative 300. And then I don't know my radians, that's what I'm trying to find, so I'm going to put my x. Again, you're going to cross multiply. So I get negative 300 pi equals 180x. Divide by 180 again to get x by itself. My pi is going to stay in my numerator, and I'm going to simplify my negative 300 and my 180 in my calculator again. And once you type that in your calculator, you should get negative 5/3. So negative 5 pi over 3 is my answer. Sometimes a question will ask you to round it to the nearest thousandth or something. If it does, you need to type this in your calculator exactly how you see it. So you need to type in negative 5 times pi and then divide by 3. So if you type that in your calculator and round to the nearest thousandth, and you always will use the pi button. You don't want to type in 3.14, your answer will be wrong. So if you round to the nearest thousandth, you get negative 5.236 if you rounded correctly. And again, you can check your answer by typing in 180 for pi to make sure you get negative 300. Okay, so those are converting degrees to radians. Now we're going to convert from radians to degrees. Okay, so now I want to convert from radians to degrees, and we're just going to do radians that have a pi in it right now. So we'll do negative 7 pi over 3. So you can do it using the proportions, and I'll show you that way, and then I'll show you the much easier way. So if you don't want to write this down, you don't have to. You could just watch. So you're going to have your pi and your 180 again. Since I'm given a radian this time, a radian measure, I'm going to put that angle measure over the pi. So 7 pi over 3. And I don't know my degree, so I'm going to put my x there. If I have 7 pi over 3 divided by pi, you have a fraction divided by a fraction. So you want to simplify that first. If you have a fraction divided by a fraction, you need to copy the first, change to multiplying, and then flip the second fraction. So if I do that, I'm going to copy my first, negative 7 pi over 3, change to multiplication, and then flip my second one. So I have pi over nothing, which is really over 1, if I wanted to make it a fraction. So if I flip that, it'd be 1 over pi. So my pi's would cancel, leaving me with just negative 7/3 times 1, which would give me negative 7/3 for this whole entire side. So I have negative 7/3 equals x over 180. Again, I'm going to cross multiply. So I get negative 7 times 180 equals 3x. So I get negative 1,260 equals 3x. Divide by 3. So I get x is equal to negative 420. That's the long way of doing it, and the much more difficult way of doing it for radian measures that have a pi in it. The other way, which is much easier, and I suggest you do, so this you do not have to write down if you do not want to, what I'm going to outline in green. The much easier way, since we know pi is equal to 180, 1 pi in radian measure is equal to 180 degrees. I can substitute in 180 into that pi. So I'm going to have negative 7 times 180 divided by 3. And when you're doing this on your classwork, I want you to write this every single time. Negative 7 times 180 when you're substituting in for pi divided by 3. And then write your answer. Don't just write your answer. So negative 7 times 180 is negative 1,260 divided by 3, and I still get my same answer with a lot less work. And you should always have your little degree symbol if it's a degree measure. So we'll do one more quickly, and then you're going to do a couple on your own. And we're going to do it the easier way. So this one we'll do 5 pi over 2. So I'm going to do it the easier way. Since I know pi is equal to 180, I'm going to substitute in 180. So I'm going to write 5 times 180. Do not use the x for multiplying. Either use a dot or parentheses. I prefer parentheses though. Divided by 2. So I get 900 in the numerator. Divided by 2 would give me 450 degrees. So now we're going to do a couple on your own. So I want you to try to convert to radians, 225 degrees, and negative 495 degrees. And I also want you to try to convert from radians 2 degrees, 11 pi over 3 and negative 5 pi. It doesn't always have to be a fraction. As long as it has a pi in it, it's a radian measure. So try those 4 on your own, and we'll check them in class.